Busy show here at Dolphins Today by Chat Sports. Tua Tagovailoa, a decision may be coming soon. It may even be imminent. That's what an NFL insider said as Combine Week approaches here. CBS Sports also named 4 Tua trade destinations that I wanted to briefly talk about. And I mentioned it. It is NFL Combine Week, and we will have exclusive interviews with head coach Jeff Hafley and John Eric Sullivan. So make sure you hit that subscribe button. Those videos are coming on Tuesday. But the report comes in from Tony Pauline, who said that the immediate plans for the Dolphins in the terms of the future with Tua could be publicly announced before the end of the Combine. In case you were wondering, the Combine runs from now until Sunday. No one expects Tua to be back with the franchise. Member of the quarterback's team even told me that the first-round pick in 2020 won't be with the Dolphins come week 1 of the 2026 season. Now, there's no surprise here, but I wanted to use this time to kind of outline, again, what the options are for the Miami Dolphins and also why this week is where we could see a decision ultimately be announced, whether it is a trade or it is a release, because with all 32 GMs in one spot, there are going to be a lot of conversations. And I'll be honest, I'd be keeping your eye open for other roster decisions that could happen with Miami in terms of Minkah Fitzpatrick and Bradley Chubb. We'll talk about that here in a second. But Sully is going to obviously gauge the trade market on Tua. Like, he'll talk with all other 31 GMs in the NFL and kind of sense where interest is with Tua in a potential trade. And if he did want to get a trade done, all right, what would it need to cost the Dolphins in terms of attaching a draft pick with Tua, in terms of paying some of that contract? And then it's his job to come away from these conversations and ultimately decide, all right, I know where other teams are with Tua. I know where the teams are interested, where they are not. What do we do now? Is it worth trading him, or is it just worth cutting our losses and releasing him this weekend or early next week, which is the week before free agency? To me, it will be a release. I've been very steady in this, and I do think it will ultimately come in the form of a post-June 1 release. We have talked ad nauseum about the differences between a pre-June 1 cut and a post-June 1 cut. The pre-June 1 cut has way more dead cap this year, but it also balloons the savings to $53.4 million in 2027. And yeah, that would be extremely beneficial. It is kind of borderline impossible to put together a legit roster in 2026. And I know it's probably something that doesn't matter anyway, because Miami's projected to have the lowest win total this upcoming season. But you won't be able to fill out a roster of 53 NFL caliber players if you take on that dead cap and increase your cap bill by negative $42 million. So releasing Tua with a post-June 1 designation, yeah, your cap bill goes up by $11 million this year. You still save $20+ million in 2027. You save a full $60 million in 2028. And the dead cap isn't as large in this upcoming season, only $67 million compared to $99 million. This week will determine a lot with Tua, the decision probably coming next week. But this week will also determine some other decisions as well, which we'll briefly mention here in just 1 second. But I do want the Dolphins fans to get their voices heard. Pick your poison. How does Miami move on from Tua? Because they're moving on regardless. Will it be in a trade or will it be in a cut? Type T for trade or type C for cut. But I mentioned it. A lot of big decisions happening this week in Indianapolis for Miami. Obviously, Tua, we just mentioned that. We're not going to really talk about the decision at hand anymore. But there are 2 other decisions that I think could be finalized this week for Miami. How is Bradley Chubb released? Because, yeah, we made a video and we talked about it last Monday about the Dolphins parting ways with Bradley Chubb, but it has not been finalized. Tyreek Hill, James Daniels, and Nick Westbrook-Keeney have. Bradley Chubb is not. How does that happen? Plus, Minkah Fitzpatrick's trade market. We will absolutely see movement there, and a trade, I think, could come as early as this weekend. But going to Bradley Chubb, because that hasn't been finalized yet. Now, it was expected early for it to be a pre-June 1 cut, which would save Miami $7.3 million in savings this season and save Miami $31.6 million in 2027. But the fact that it has not been officially announced yet tells me that Miami could make this a post-June 1 designation. Remember, you get 2 post-June 1 designation releases that can happen prior to the actual June 1st date. And when you look at the salary differences, Miami saves $20 million against the cap this year for Bradley Chubb if it's a post-6-1 designation, which is what I prefer. Yes, the savings in 2027 are a little bit less, only 18 in compared to 31 it would be pre-June 1, but the Dolphins could absolutely utilize that extra $13 million in cap space this season, which would help sign their draft class they will have in April, help maybe sign a couple other free agents. And if the Dolphins are seriously pursuing Malik Willis in free agency, when that opens up in a couple weeks on March 9th, they're going to need that extra cap space, which could come if you do release Bradley Chubb with a post-6-1 designation. But I did want to briefly mention Minkah Fitzpatrick on today's show as well, because the fallout between him, I think, does ultimately mean what happens with Chubb in Tua as well. Because if the Dolphins trade Minkah this week during the Combine, accumulate a couple more draft picks in 2026 draft, well, then it is a no doubt Tua and Chubb post 6-1 cuts. Because remember, you get 2 designations, and why wouldn't you utilize it if you traded Minkah Fitzpatrick this week? But if you cannot trade Minkah and no one wants him, which I find incredibly unlikely and I don't anticipate happening, well, then I would imagine they do release Minkah Fitzpatrick post-June 1, save $15 million in cap space alongside Tua's post-June 1 designation, and ultimately cut Bradley Chubb with a pre-6-1 designation. There's a lot of moving parts here, but I think a lot of it will be finalized this week in Indianapolis. Coming up in just one bit, even though I don't think Tua gets traded, I do want to talk about 4 potential destinations that were listed from CBS Sports. But before we get into that, today's show is brought to you by Ethos. I watched someone close to me go through loss, and I saw how quickly grief can turn into financial stress. That experience changed how I think about protecting my family and future. Life insurance isn't about expecting the worst, but it's about making sure the people you love are supported no matter what. That's why I recommend life insurance through Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. Application times may vary, but there's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. And it's not me who just trusts Ethos. Ethos has 4.8 out of 5 stars on Trustpilot with over 3,000 reviews. Help protect your family with life insurance through Ethos. Get your instant free quote at ethos.com/NFL Daily. That is ethos.com/NFL Daily. Application times and rates may vary. Links in the description and comments of today's video. Now up on the show, let's talk about the Tua Tagovailoa trade destinations via CBS Sports, because there has been a lot of talk about how there isn't going to be a trade, where I would agree and line in that sentiment. But if there were teams that wanted to trade for Tua, who may they be? Well, the first destination named from CBS Sports was actually the Minnesota Vikings, which to me was incredibly puzzling. Now, I do think Minnesota will ultimately go out and try to acquire a veteran quarterback in some capacity, because J.J. McCarthy looked that bad last season for Minnesota. But I think most Dolphins fans will realize why it is absolutely jumping the shark and no chance of this happening. And it just has to go back to a coach who is on the Vikings staff right now. Defensive coordinator and former Dolphins head coach, Brian Flores. Like, do we really think that Minnesota would trade for Tua, bring him in, and have him in the same locker room and building as Brian Flores, the same man who Tua publicly said was borderline bullying him? Yeah, that just ain't going to happen, guys. So even if it makes sense for Minnesota to add a veteran quarterback like Tua to compete with J.J. McCarthy, these two being in the same building, I don't think will ever happen again, which is why I don't think Minnesota is even on the radar for a Tua trade. The Arizona Cardinals were a second team named by CBS Sports. This is another team that I just look at on face value and say, no way. Because Arizona is in the same boat and position that Miami is in right now. The Cardinals are likely going to try to trade their quarterback, Kyler Murray, who has a $50 million plus cap hit. And if they cannot, there is a very high likelihood they release Kyler Murray. So if they release Kyler Murray or want to trade him, why would they trade for Tua? I actually believe Arizona is the most likely suitor for Malik Willis. They have $39 million in cap space. They're going to need a quarterback once they move on from Kyler Murray. There's connections between Nathaniel Hackett, Mike LaFleur, and Malik Willis. I think Arizona is the team that ultimately signs Willis in NFL free agency, not Miami, and it certainly won't be a team that trades for Tua. Now, the first team that legitimately intrigues me is the Indianapolis Colts. This was the one team on this list of four that I could come back and say, all right, I could see that actually happening. And I want to look at CBS Sports reasonings here. Tua doesn't have any guaranteed money left after the 2026 season, so he could fill in for Daniel Jones for a couple weeks, finish out the 2026 season in Indy, and then the Colts could release or trade him during the 2027 offseason. Now, this also comes in with the same idea that Miami is buying this trade in terms of ultimately paying all of Tua's 2026 salary, which would likely be the case if they made a trade regardless. But it does make sense, right? Indy's probably going to re-sign Daniel Jones, but he is probably not going to be ready for week one. And if he is, it might be smarter to ultimately wait to bring him back in late September, early October, coming back from that Achilles injury and leg injury he had last season that ultimately happened in November, late in the year. So getting a veteran like Tua in Shane Steichen's offense that can kind of right the ship and hold things down for the first month and then Daniel Jones returns makes a little bit of sense. This is the first team that I think could trade for Tua if Miami pays all of the 2026 salary. Final team that CBS Sports mentioned was the Atlanta Falcons. You get it from a certain degree because it's like, oh, they have Michael Penix Jr., a lefty quarterback. You bring in Tua to compete / back him up. And if there's injury concerns or Penix continues to struggle, you have a lefty quarterback and you don't change your entire offensive scheme to a right-handed quarterback. But I don't see it from a financial standpoint. They are going to release Kirk Cousins. They are not going to go out and trade for Tua. And yes, I know Tua is likely not going to be expensive for these teams in 2026 because Miami's paying most of the salary. It just doesn't make that much sense to me. Why are you going to have Kirk Cousins, release him, and then go out and trade for Tua? I just do not see it. But fill in the blank for me. Tua Tagovailoa will be on the blank team in 2026. I'm going to give you my prediction here in a second, and it's not one of the four teams we just mentioned, but let me know your prediction down in the comments. I think it is going to be the Los Angeles Rams. Now, this also comes on the basis that Miami just downright cuts Tua, and then when Tua's a free agent and he's going to sign for the vet min because he's already getting paid a shit ton of money from Miami to get released, why wouldn't he go to Los Angeles, right? Back up Matthew Stafford, learn under Sean McVay, kind of go to quarterback rehab, if you will, and then if Stafford retires next season, well, guess what? Tua could be the starter in a Rams Sean McVay-led offense. I think that makes a ton of sense. Final word on today's show. The point of me even bringing up these four teams that I mentioned from CBS Sports is I wanted to explain why I believe it is so incredibly unlikely that a Tua trade happens. Sure, these other teams probably won't mind trading a 6th or 5th round pick if Tua's contract is fully paid for from Miami, which is likely going to happen. But I still don't think there's a lot of interest there because there's a lot of extra baggage. of the media circus of like, oh, do you play Tua if your starting quarterback struggles? Like, I don't see it happening. I do see a release happening within the next week. We know that a decision will happen prior to March 13th because on March 13th, some guaranteed money, about $3 million, gets guaranteed for Tua in 2027. Miami's not going to let that happen. So a decision's happening before them, but I think it happens before free agency opens on March 9th. So make sure you stay subscribed because when Tua gets released, we will have you covered with a video to break down how they ultimately did it. So hit that sub button and join the channel.